told his mistress he had lost his wife. He said those exact words, lost his wife. And he said them on December 9th, 2002. December 9th. Hold that date in your mind because it matters. It matters more than almost anything else in this story. Laci Peterson was still alive on December 9th. She was still breathing, still walking, still decorating the nursery for a baby boy she had already named Connor. She was 8 months pregnant. Her due date was February 10th. She had picked the color of the walls. She had folded the tiny clothes into the dresser drawers. She had a list of names on the refrigerator, and Connor was the one she circled in red ink. And while she was doing all of that, her husband, Scott Peterson, was on the phone with another woman, a woman named Frey, and he was telling Amber that he had lost his wife, that this would be his first Christmas alone. First Christmas alone. His wife was in the next room. Was that a confession disguised as a lie? Was he rehearsing something he had already decided to do? Or was it just another layer of deception from a man who had built his entire life on the surface of things? Miles, Ghost Hunter here. And this is the story of how one man's double life consumed everything around it. How charm became camouflage. How a Christmas Eve disappearance became one of the most notorious cases in American criminal history. And how, for 4 impossible months, a community, a family, and an entire nation searched for a woman whose husband already knew she would never come home. Some men do not just cheat, they erase. Let me take you back. Not to the crime, not yet. First, you need to understand who Laci Peterson was before she became a headline, before she became a search, before she became a photograph on a poster stapled to a telephone pole in Modesto, California. Because the thing about Laci Denise Rocha is that everyone who knew her said the same thing. Not in the generic way people talk about someone after tragedy. Not the empty phrases like, she was a good person, or she had a kind heart. No, everyone said the same specific thing. They said Laci walked into a room and the room changed. The energy shifted. She was one of those people who made you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she was talking to you. She leaned in. She remembered details. She asked about your kids by name. Her mother Sharon Rocha described her this way. When Laci was little, she would walk up to strangers in the grocery store and start conversations. Not shy, not cautious, just open, wide open to the world, like she trusted everyone in it to be as decent as she was. Laci was born on May 4th, 1975, in Modesto, California, the Central Valley. Hot summers, farming country. The kind of town where people leave their doors unlocked, and everyone knows everyone. Her parents, Dennis Rocha and Sharon Rocha, divorced when she was young. Sharon remarried. Laci grew up in a household that was loud and warm and full of food. Her mother cooked constantly. Laci picked that up. By the time she was a teenager, she was hosting dinner parties. Not pretending, actually cooking for 8, 10, 12 people. Setting the table with real napkins, lighting candles. She went to California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly. She studied ornamental horticulture. She loved plants. She loved the idea of making things grow. Her friends from college said the same thing her childhood friends said, that she was the glue, the one who organized the trips, planned the birthdays, sent the cards. She remembered everyone, and she forgot nothing. It was at Cal Poly that she met Scott Peterson. And here is where the story splits into 2 tracks that ran parallel for years before they collided on a Christmas Eve in Modesto. Scott Lee Peterson was born on October 24th, 1972, in San Diego, California. His parents, Lee and Jackie Peterson, ran a crate. She walked in with a friend. By all accounts, the attraction was immediate. Scott was handsome in a conventional, non-threatening way. Square jaw, easy smile, the kind of face you see in a J. Crew catalog. And he knew how to listen. Or at least, he knew how to look like he was listening. They started dating. They fell hard. Laci's family loved Scott. Sharon Rocha adored him. He was charming and polite, and he always helped clear the table after dinner. Always. That detail came up in interviews years later. Sharon said he was the only boyfriend who ever helped with the dishes. They married on August 9, 1997, at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort in San Luis Obispo. Laci wore a white gown. She was 22. He was 24. In the wedding photographs, they looked like a couple from a magazine spread, his hand on her waist, her head tilted into his shoulder. Every image perfectly composed, perfectly lit, like someone had arranged them on a shelf. After college, they moved to San Luis Obispo, then to Modesto. They bought a house at 523 Covina Avenue, a craftsman-style home in a nice neighborhood. Laci threw herself into the house the way she threw herself into everything. New curtains, new garden. She joined a book club. She volunteered at a local charity. She became the neighbor who brought you a pie when you moved in. Scott worked as a salesman for TradeCorp, a company that sold fertilizer to farms and nurseries. He was good at it. Of course he was good at it. Selling is performing, and Scott Peterson was a natural performer. He drove a truck and visited clients all over the Central Valley, and he made decent money. Not rich, but comfortable. Comfortable enough for a nice house and a good life and a baby on the way. Because by mid-2002, Laci was pregnant, and the pregnancy lit her up. Friends said she glowed, not in the cliché way, in the way that she became even more herself, more social, more excited, more present. She talked about the baby constantly. She bought a crib. She set up the nursery. She picked the name Connor. She had a mental calendar counting down to February 10th, 2003, the due date. She and Scott attended birthing classes together. They went to the doctor together. They talked about the future together. Or at least, Laci talked about the future. Scott showed up for the appointments and smiled in the right places. But something else was happening. Something that existed in a completely separate world from the nursery on Covina Avenue. On November 26, 2002, Scott Peterson walked into a bar in Fresno, and he met a woman named Amber Frey. Amber Frey was a massage therapist, 27 years old, single mother of a 20-month-old daughter. She had been set up on a date with Scott by a mutual friend named Sean Sibley. And here is the first thing you need to know about that date. Sean Sibley told Amber that Scott was unmarried, no wife, no kids, available. And Scott Peterson did nothing to correct that impression. Nothing at all. He showed up for that first date at a Japanese restaurant in Fresno, and he was everything Amber thought she was looking for. Polished, attentive, well-dressed. He talked about traveling to Europe. He talked about going to Paris for New Year's Eve. He talked about his life as if it were wide open and unattached. They began seeing each other regularly. Dinners, phone calls, long conversations late at night. Amber later said that Scott was one of the most charming men she had ever met. He made her feel seen. He made her feel like she mattered. He was good at that. And then came December 9th. December 9th, 2002. Scott called Amber, and during that conversation, he told her something that would later become the most chilling detail in the entire case. He said he had lost his wife. He said this would be his first Christmas without her. Amber assumed he meant that his wife had passed away, that Scott was a widower. That was the story he was selling, and she believed it because why would someone lie about something like that? Why would you invent grief? What kind of person rehearses widowhood while his pregnant wife is decorating the Christmas tree? December 9th. Laci Peterson was alive. She was in the house on Covina Avenue. She was 8 months pregnant. She was wrapping presents. She was calling friends to finalize plans for Christmas dinner. And her husband was on the phone with his girlfriend, practicing the future tense of her disappearance. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because this is not just about infidelity. This is not just about a man who cheated on his pregnant wife. That happens every day. It is cruel, and it is common, and it is as old as marriage itself. But this is different. This is a man who told his mistress that his wife was gone. Before she was gone, he was not describing a tragedy. He was describing a plan, whether he knew it or not, whether he said it on purpose or not. The words came out of his mouth, and they mapped the future with perfect accuracy. Lost his wife, first Christmas alone. 15 days later, both of those things would be true. Now I need to take you through those 15 days, because between December 9th and December 24th, the double life of Scott Peterson did not slow down. It accelerated. On December 14th, just 5 days after the phone call, Scott took Amber to a Christmas formal at a hotel in Fresno. Black tie. He wore a tuxedo. She wore a red dress. They danced. They kissed. Photographs exist from that evening. In those photographs, Scott Peterson looks like a man without a care in the world. Wide smile, relaxed shoulders, arm around Amber's waist. 5 days after telling her he lost his wife. 10 days before his wife would actually vanish. Meanwhile, on that same weekend, Laci was at her mother Sharon's house, helping prepare food for the holidays. She was tired, 8 months pregnant in December. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, but she was happy. She talked about the nursery. She talked about Connor. She talked about what they would do as a family once the baby came. Scott called her from the Christmas formal. She picked up. He told her he was at a work event. She believed him. Why would she not believe him? He had never given her reason to doubt. Or rather, he had given her plenty of reasons. But none that she could see, because the surface was always flawless. And that is the thing about Scott Peterson that you have to understand. He was not sloppy. He was not a bad liar. He was an extraordinary liar. He lied with the same ease that other people breathe. There was no tell, no shifting eyes, no nervous hands. He looked you dead in the face and told you something that was completely untrue, and his heart rate did not change. His neighbors on Covenant Avenue thought he was a great guy, friendly, always waving, always asking about their kids. The couple across the street said Scott and Laci were relationship goals. Those were the actual words they used. Relationship goals. His in-laws thought he was the perfect son-in-law. Sharon Rocha trusted him completely. Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky, liked him. Laci's brother, Brent Rocha, considered him a friend. His co-workers at Trade Corp thought he was a solid employee, reliable, professional, easy to work with. Nobody saw anything. Nobody suspected anything. Because Scott Peterson had constructed something far more dangerous than a lie. He had constructed an identity, a complete, airtight, fully furnished identity as a devoted husband and soon-to-be father. And he maintained that identity with the same discipline that a spy maintains a cover. Every day, every interaction, every smile and handshake and "How are you doing?" All of it was performance. And behind that performance, the second life was running on its own separate track. Between late November and December 24th, Scott Peterson made approximately 30 phone calls to Amber Frey. Many of them lasted over an hour. He called her from his truck on the road between sales appointments. He called her from the parking lot of the gym where Laci took pregnancy exercise classes. He called her from the driveway of the house where his pregnant wife was asleep. He told Amber about his plans for the future. He talked about traveling together. He talked about building something real. He said the words every woman wants to hear, and he said them with conviction. And Amber believed him, because there was nothing in his voice that suggested he was sitting in a truck in front of a house where a woman was sleeping with his baby inside her. That is the double life. Not just two women, two realities, two separate versions of Scott Peterson running simultaneously, never intersecting, each one fully committed and fully false. And then came Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2002. Modesto, California. The weather was cool and overcast, a typical Central Valley winter morning. Laci Peterson woke up in the house on Covina Avenue. She was wearing black pants and a white top. Her hair was clipped up. According to the timeline that was later reconstructed from phone records, alarm systems, and neighbor observations, the morning went something like this. Around 8 o'clock, Laci was up and moving around the house. She was making something in the kitchen. Some accounts say it was French toast. Others say she was preparing food for the Christmas dinner they were supposed to attend at Sharon Rocha's house that evening. Either way, she was in the kitchen, 8 months pregnant, barefoot on the tile floor, doing what she always did, taking care of things. Scott Peterson was also awake. He was doing something in the backyard. What exactly he was doing depends on which version of his story you believe, and over the coming weeks and months, Scott would offer multiple versions. But on that morning, at some point before 10 o'clock, Scott Peterson made a decision that he would later describe to police as a spontaneous whim. He decided to go fishing. Not fishing at a local lake, not fishing at the San Joaquin River, which was minutes from his house, fishing at the Berkeley Marina in San Francisco Bay, 90 miles away, on Christmas Eve, in a boat he had just purchased 2 weeks earlier. 90 miles, on Christmas Eve morning. While his pregnant wife was in the kitchen making breakfast, he decided on the spur of the moment to drive 90 miles to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay in December, in cold water, in overcast skies, on a day when every store, every marina, every business in the state was closing early for the holiday. He had purchased the boat on December 9th, the same day he told Amber Frey he had lost his wife. The same day, a 14-foot aluminum Sears game fisher boat bought for $1,400 cash from a man in Bakersfield. He stored it in a rented warehouse on Emerald Avenue in Modesto, about 2 miles from the house on Covina Avenue. He did not tell Laci about the boat. He told no one about the boat. In that same warehouse, investigators would later find something else. Cement dust on the floor, a homemade cement anchor, and traces of more anchors that no longer existed. But we are still on the morning of December 24th. Scott Peterson loaded his truck. He hitched the boat to the trailer, and at some point between 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning, he drove away from 523 Covina Avenue. Laci Peterson was inside the house. That was the last time she was seen alive by anyone other than her husband. The next confirmed sighting of Scott Peterson places him at the Berkeley Marina at approximately 12:54 in the afternoon. A marina security camera captured his truck and boat trailer entering the parking lot. He launched the boat. He went out on the water. He stayed for a period of time that he would later describe as about an hour. Then he returned. He pulled the boat out. He drove 90 miles back to Modesto. And here's the question that would define the entire investigation. What happened in those hours between 10 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon? Where was Laci between the time Scott left and the time Scott arrived at the marina? Because if Scott left the house at 10 and arrived at the marina at 12:54, that is almost 3 hours. 3 hours for a 90-mile drive that should take an hour and a half. What was he doing for the other hour and a half? And where was Laci? Scott Peterson would tell police that when he left the house, Laci was planning to walk the dog, their golden retriever, Mackenzie. Laci walked Mackenzie regularly through the neighborhood and in nearby East La Loma Park. Scott said that was her plan for the morning. He would go fishing. She would walk the dog. They would meet up later for Christmas Eve dinner at her mother's house. That was his story. And it was the last piece of normality in this entire case. Because at 5:17 in the evening on December 24th, Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, received a phone call from Scott Peterson. He asked her a question that would change everything. "Is Laci there?" Sharon said no. Laci had not arrived. She had not called. Sharon had been expecting her for hours. They were supposed to have dinner together. The whole family was there. Everyone except Laci. Scott said he had just gotten home from fishing and Laci was not at the house. The dog was in the backyard with its leash still on. The back gate was open. Laci's car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the counter. Her keys were on the hook. Everything was there, except Laci. Sharon Rocha felt something crack inside her chest. She would later describe it as the moment she knew something was terribly wrong. Not suspected, knew. A mother's knowledge that lives below the level of logic and evidence and reason. She drove to the house on Covenant Avenue. By the time she arrived, Scott had already called the police. Officers from the Modesto Police Department responded to a missing persons report at approximately 5:45 in the evening. And from that moment forward, the city of Modesto went to war. Volunteers materialized within hours, not dozens. Hundreds, then thousands. The Laci Peterson case became a phenomenon almost overnight. Yellow ribbons went up on every fence post and every lamp post in the neighborhood. Flyers with Laci's photograph were printed by the tens of thousands. Her smile. 8 months pregnant. Have you seen this woman? Search teams combed East La Loma Park. Divers went into the channels and waterways around Modesto. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters flew overhead. The local news covered it around the clock, and within days, the national news picked it up. A beautiful pregnant woman disappearing on Christmas Eve. It was the kind of story that stops a nation. Every detail was designed to break your heart. The nursery she had just finished decorating. The baby boy she had already named. The Christmas presents still wrapped under the tree. The husband who came home from fishing to find his wife gone. And Scott Peterson stood at the center of it all, performing the role of the desperate husband, with the same flawless composure he brought to everything else. He appeared on television, he did interviews, he spoke to reporters with tears in his eyes. He attended candlelight vigils and hugged Laci's family and wore a yellow ribbon on his jacket and said all the right things. Please bring Laci home, please if anyone has seen her, please, we just want her back. And inside the Modesto Police Department, detectives were watching him very carefully, because something was wrong. Detective Al Brocchini was one of the first officers on the scene at 523 Covenant Avenue. He spoke to Scott that first night. And later, Brocchini would say something that everyone in law enforcement understands, but most people do not. He said Scott Peterson did not act like a man whose pregnant wife was missing. He acted like a man who was waiting for something to be over. There is a difference, a real difference, and experienced investigators know it. When someone you love is missing, you are frantic, you are irrational, you are terrified. You call everyone you know. You run down the street screaming their name. You cannot sit still. Your hands shake, your voice breaks, your body betrays the panic that your brain cannot control. Scott Peterson was calm. He was organized. He was cooperative in the way that someone is cooperative when they have already prepared for the questions. He had his story straight from the first minute. Went fishing, Berkeley Marina, left around 9:30, came home around 4:30. Laci was going to walk the dog. That was the plan. He repeated it without variation. Same words, same order, same flat delivery. Detective Brocchini asked him what he was fishing for. Scott said he was fishing for sturgeon in the San Francisco Bay in December from a 14-foot aluminum boat that he had just bought 2 weeks earlier, with no fishing experience that anyone could verify, with no one who knew he was going, and with a single-day fishing license purchased that very morning at a Big Five sporting goods store on his way to the marina. A single-day fishing license, purchased the morning of, for a trip that was supposedly spontaneous, to a location 90 miles away, on Christmas Eve. Brocchini noted all of this. He did not confront Scott, not yet. He filed his report, and he began pulling phone records. And the phone records told a very different story from the one Scott Peterson was selling to the television cameras. In the days that followed Laci's disappearance, Scott Peterson continued to play the part. He handed out flyers, he attended vigils, he hugged Sharon Rocha and told her they would find Laci. He looked into the cameras and begged for his wife's safe return. And in the spaces between the cameras, in the dark pockets of his day where no one was watching, he was calling Amber Frey. He called her on December 25th, Christmas Day. While the entire city was searching for his pregnant wife, Scott Peterson called his girlfriend. He called her on the 26th, the 27th, the 28th. He kept the second life running, even as the first one was supposed to be in crisis. And the calls were not panicked. They were not the calls of a man in distress. They were romantic. He told Amber about his holiday. He complained about the media. He talked about the future. He talked about when they could see each other again. On New Year's Eve, while Laci's family was praying and the search was entering its second week, Scott Peterson called Amber Frey and told her he was in Paris. Paris, France. He described the Eiffel Tower. He described the fireworks. He described the champagne. He told her he was celebrating the new year in the City of Light. He was not in Paris. He was at a vigil for his missing wife in Modesto, standing in a crowd of people who were crying and holding candles and praying for Laci to come home. And he stepped away from that crowd, took out his phone, and told his girlfriend he was watching fireworks over the Seine. That was who Scott Peterson was. He could stand in a prayer circle for his missing wife and simultaneously romance another woman with lies about a European vacation. Two realities, running at the same time, neither one real. But the double life was about to collapse. Because on December 30th, 2002, 6 days after Laci disappeared, something happened that Scott Peterson had not planned for. A woman named Shawn Sibley saw a news report about the missing pregnant woman in Modesto, and she recognized the husband. She recognized Scott Peterson. He was the man she had introduced to her friend Amber Frey a month earlier. The unmarried man. The man with no wife and no children and no attachments. Shawn Sibley called Amber Frey, and she told her the truth. The man you are dating is Scott Peterson. His wife is Laci Peterson. She is 8 months pregnant. She has been missing since Christmas Eve. Amber Frey did not collapse. She did not hide. She did something that changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. She called the Modesto Police Department. On January 6, 2003, Amber Frey walked into the Modesto Police headquarters and told detectives everything. Every phone call, every date, every lie Scott had told her. And she agreed to do something extraordinary. She agreed to continue talking to Scott on the phone, to keep the relationship going, to act as if she did not know the truth, because they proved he committed a crime, but because they proved who he was. They proved that on the night vigils were held and tears were shed, and volunteers walked through freezing fields calling Laci's name. Her husband was on the phone with his girlfriend, talking about the future, and the future he was describing did not include Laci. Meanwhile, the investigation was tightening. Detective Craig Grogan took over as lead investigator. He was methodical, thorough, and he did not believe Scott Peterson's phishing story for 1 second. The detectives pulled Scott's computer records, and they found something. In the days before Laci's disappearance, Scott had used his computer at work to access 2 specific things. The first was a website showing the currents and tidal patterns of the San Francisco Bay. The second was a map of the Berkeley Marina. He looked up the currents in the bay. Before the fishing trip, before the spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment decision to drive 90 miles on Christmas Eve, he had already researched the water. He had already studied where things go when they enter the bay, where the currents carry them, how the tides move. And there was more. The warehouse on Emerald Avenue. The one where Scott stored the boat he bought on December 9th. Investigators executed a search warrant on that warehouse and found a cement residue on the floor. They found a homemade anchor made of cement in the boat. 1 anchor. But the cement residue suggested there had been more. At least 4, possibly 5. Homemade cement anchors, formed in bucket molds, with chicken wire embedded inside for strength. 1 anchor was in the boat. The others were gone. Where were the other anchors? That question haunted the investigation, because if you are going fishing, you do not need 4 or 5 homemade cement anchors. 1 is already unusual. 5 is inexplicable, unless you are not using them to anchor a boat, unless you are using them to anchor something else. Something you need to stay at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay. The detectives did not say this publicly, not yet. They were building a case, piece by piece, and they were patient. They let Scott Peterson walk free. They let him give interviews. They let him attend vigils and hand out flyers and play the grieving husband. And they watched. They watched him very carefully. And what they saw was a man who was not behaving like a husband in crisis. He was behaving like a man in transition. In January, while the search was still active and thousands of volunteers were combing the fields and waterways around Modesto, Scott Peterson sold Laci's car. He sold her Land Rover. Her family found out and they were stunned. You do not sell your missing wife's car. Not if you believe she is coming home. Not if you are waiting by the door for her to walk back in. You sell her car if you already know she is not coming back. He also started looking into the value of the house on Covina Avenue. Real estate inquiries, property assessments, as if he were preparing to move. As if the life he had built with Laci was already in the rearview mirror, and he was calculating what it was worth on the open market. Sharon Rocha noticed the changes, the little things. Scott was pulling away from the family. He was less available, less present at the search efforts. His calls were shorter, his answers were vaguer. And Sharon, who had loved this man like a son, who had trusted him completely, who had defended him when the first whispers of suspicion began to circulate. Sharon started to feel something she could not name, a coldness in her chest, a sense that the man standing next to her at the vigils was not the man she thought he was. She would later say that losing Laci was one kind of pain. Realizing that Scott had something to do with it was a different kind of pain entirely. The first pain was grief. The second was betrayal so deep, it rewired her understanding of everything she had ever believed about people. On January 15, 2003, Amber Frey held a press conference. She stood in front of the cameras with her attorney Gloria Allred, and she told the world that she had been in a romantic relationship with Scott Peterson, that he had told her he was unmarried, that she had not known about Laci until after the disappearance, and that she was cooperating fully with the police. The effect was seismic. The case split wide open. Up until that moment, the public narrative had been sympathetic to Scott. Worried husband, missing wife, desperate search. But Amber Frey's press conference changed everything. Now there was a motive. Now there was a reason. A man with a pregnant wife and a girlfriend. A man who wanted one life and not the other. The court of public opinion shifted overnight. Scott Peterson went from sympathetic figure to prime suspect in the span of a single news cycle. Yellow ribbons were torn down from fences. People who had hugged him at vigils now refused to make eye contact. And Scott Peterson, for the first time, began to show cracks. Not big cracks, not confessions or breakdowns or moments of visible guilt. Small cracks. He dyed his hair. He grew a goatee. He started carrying large amounts of cash. He changed his appearance subtly, week by week, as if he were slowly dissolving one version of himself and assembling another. The police noticed. They were still watching. February came. March came. The search continued. But hope was fading. The volunteers thinned out. The television cameras came less often. The vigils grew smaller. Modesto was exhausted. Sharon Rocha was exhausted. The entire community was running on fumes and faith, and the faith was crumbling. And then, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog along the shore of San Francisco Bay, near Point Isabel in Richmond, California, found something on the rocks. It was a small body, badly decomposed, carried by the tides and deposited on the shore like driftwood. The body of an infant, a boy. The umbilical cord was still attached. He had been carried inside his mother and delivered into the water by forces no one should ever have to imagine. The next day, April 14th, approximately 1 mile south of where the infant was found, another body washed ashore. A woman, also badly decomposed. The head was missing, the forearms were missing, both legs below the knee were missing. What remained was a torso, wrapped in what appeared to be the remnants of clothing. But the body was identifiable. Dental records, DNA. The remains were confirmed, Laci Denise Peterson, and the infant was her son, Connor. They were found in the San Francisco Bay, on the shoreline near the Berkeley Marina, the exact body of water where Scott Peterson said he had gone fishing on Christmas Eve. The exact water, not a lake somewhere else, not a river in a different county. The exact spot, the precise body of water that Scott Peterson chose, out of every body of water in the state of California, for a spontaneous fishing trip on Christmas Eve morning. The currents of the bay had carried the bodies from where they entered the water to where they came to rest on the shore. And the trajectory matched perfectly with the area where Scott said he had been fishing. Experts who analyzed the tidal patterns and current data concluded that the bodies were deposited in the bay, in the area near Brooks Island, which is directly accessible from the Berkeley Marina. The fishing trip was the crime scene. Miles, ghost hunter here, and I need you to understand what happened in the days after the bodies were found, because what Scott Peterson did next tells you everything about who he was. When the bodies were discovered, the news traveled fast. Every television station in California broke into regular programming. Laci and Connor Peterson had been found. The search was over. The worst outcome had been confirmed, and the nation turned its eyes back to Modesto, waiting for the arrest they now considered inevitable. But Scott Peterson was not in Modesto. On April 18, 2003, 4 days after the bodies were identified, Scott Peterson was stopped by police near a golf course in La Jolla, California. La Jolla, 30 miles from the Mexican border. When officers approached his vehicle, they found the following items: nearly $15,000 in cash, his brother's driver's license, multiple cell phones, a MapQuest printout of directions to Amber Frey's workplace, camping equipment, clothing that did not match his normal wardrobe, and his appearance had changed dramatically. His hair was bleached orange. He had a full goatee. He looked like a different person. He was not heading to a vigil. He was not heading to his wife's memorial. He was heading south, toward the border, with cash, fake identification, and a disguise. Scott Peterson was arrested on April 18, 2003, and charged with 2 counts of taking a life. First degree for Laci Denise Peterson. Second degree for Connor Peterson. He was transported to the Stanislaus County Jail. Bail was denied. The trial was set. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, the mask was off. The charming husband, the devoted partner, the man who helped with the dishes and hugged his mother-in-law and waved to the neighbors, that man was gone. In his place was a man with bleached hair and a pocket full of cash sitting in a holding cell 30 miles from Mexico. The trial of Scott Peterson began on June 1, 2004, in Redwood City, California. The case had been moved from Stanislaus County due to massive pretrial publicity. There was not a person in Modesto who had not already formed an opinion. The judge granted the change of venue, and the trial relocated to San Mateo County. The prosecution was led by Rick DiStazo and Dave Harris. The defense was led by Mark Geragos, one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys in California. The courtroom was packed every day. The media presence was enormous. Camera crews from every major network lined the sidewalk outside the courthouse. Sketch artists filled notebooks. Reporters filed stories hourly. The prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. There was no eyewitness. There was no physical evidence directly tying Scott to the act. No DNA under fingernails, no fibers, no weapon. The prosecution had to build their case on a mountain of behavioral evidence, phone records, computer searches, financial records, and the overwhelming coincidence that Laci's body was found in the exact body of water where Scott claimed to have been fishing. Rick DiStaso opened by laying out the timeline. December 9th, the boat purchase, the call to Amber. December 14th, the Christmas formal. December 24th, the fishing trip, the cement anchors, the computer searches, the currents, the bodies found 4 months later in the bay. Each piece alone might be explainable. Together, they formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. But the centerpiece of the prosecution's case was Amber Frey. Amber Frey took the stand on August 10th, 2004. She testified for 5 days, and during those 5 days, the jury heard the recorded phone calls, every single one of them. They heard Scott Peterson call his girlfriend on Christmas Day, while his wife's family was sobbing in the living room of Sharon Rocha's house. They heard him describe Paris on New Year's Eve while standing at a vigil in Modesto. They heard him talk about the future, about traveling together, about building a life, while Laci's body was somewhere in the dark water of the San Francisco Bay. And the most damaging recording of all, the call from December 9th, 2 weeks before Laci disappeared. "I lost my wife. This will be my first Christmas alone." That recording played in the courtroom, and the air went out of the room. Jurors leaned forward, Sharon Rocha covered her face, and Scott Peterson sat at the defense table with no expression at all. Mark Geragos fought hard. He challenged every piece of evidence. He argued that the case was entirely circumstantial. He suggested alternative theories, a homeless encampment near the park where Laci walked the dog, the possibility that someone else was responsible. He pointed out the lack of physical evidence. No cause of death had been determined because the bodies were too decomposed. The prosecution could not even say with certainty how Laci had died. And Geragos was right about some of those points. The case did have gaps. The circumstantial nature of the evidence was a legitimate weakness, and the lack of a determined cause of death was unusual in a case of this magnitude. But the jury was not evaluating individual pieces of evidence. They were evaluating a pattern, and the pattern was devastating. A man buys a boat and tells his mistress he lost his wife on the same day. He researches the currents of the bay on his work computer. He makes homemade cement anchors in a warehouse he rented in secret. He drives 90 miles on Christmas Eve to go fishing in that exact body of water. His wife disappears that same morning. He calls his girlfriend on Christmas Day. He lies about being in Paris on New Year's Eve. He sells his wife's car. He dyes his hair. He is caught near the Mexican border, with cash and his brother's identification. Each piece alone might be circumstantial. Together, they spelled one word. And that word echoed through the courtroom with a weight that no closing argument could match. On November 12, 2004, after nearly 6 months of trial and 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. First degree for Laci Peterson. Second degree for Connor Peterson. Sharon Rocha collapsed in the hallway outside the courtroom. She fell to her knees and she screamed. Not a dramatic scream, a real one. The sound a human being makes when the last molecule of hope leaves their body and there is nothing left but the naked truth of what happened. Scott Peterson showed no reaction. None. He sat at the defense table and his face did not change. Not a flicker, not a twitch. The same composure that had carried him through 8 months of lies and 4 months of searching and 6 months of trial held steady in the moment of his conviction. On December 13th, 2004, the same jury recommended the death penalty. Judge Alfred DeLucci imposed the sentence on March 16th, 2005. Scott Peterson was sent to San Quentin State Prison's death row. He was 32 years old. But the legal story did not end there. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death sentence. Not the conviction, the death sentence. The court found that prospective jurors had been improperly excluded during jury selection because of their opposition to capital punishment. The case was sent back for a new penalty phase. In 2021, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office decided not to seek the death penalty again. Scott Peterson was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains in prison today. He is in his early 50s. He has filed multiple appeals. His defense team, now led by the Los Angeles Innocence Project, has argued for a new trial based on claims of evidence that was not fully tested. In 2024, a judge ordered new DNA testing on specific items of evidence. That testing is ongoing as of this recording. Scott Peterson maintains his innocence. He has never confessed. He has never wavered from his story. He went fishing. He came home. Laci was gone. That is his position, and he has held it for over 2 decades. His family believes him. Laci Peterson, his mother, went to her grave believing her son was innocent. Laci Peterson, his father, still advocates for his release. His siblings have stood by him. Laci's family does not waver either. Sharon Rocha has spent the years since the trial advocating for victims' rights. She wrote a book about Laci. She speaks publicly about her daughter. She carries Laci's memory the way a lighthouse carries a flame, visible from a great distance, constant and burning. And Connor, the boy who never breathed outside his mother's body, the boy who was named and loved and waited for, the boy who had a nursery and a crib and a mobile hanging from the ceiling, and a mother who had counted down the days until she could hold him. Connor Peterson became the catalyst for federal legislation. On April 1, 2004, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act into law. It is known as Laci and Connor's Law. The law recognizes an unborn child as a legal victim if injured or harmed during the commission of a federal crime. Connor Peterson never took a breath, but his name is written into the legal code of the United States of America. Now I want to step back from the timeline. I want to step back from the facts and the dates and the evidence and the verdicts. Because this story is not just about what Scott Peterson did. It is about how he was able to do it, how a man could lead. And the answer is uncomfortable. Because the answer is not that they were stupid. The answer is not that they were negligent. The answer is that Scott Peterson was very, very good at what he did. And what he did was perform normalcy. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called the halo effect. It works like this. When someone possesses one strongly positive trait, that trait creates a glow that distorts your perception of everything else about them. If someone is physically attractive, you are more likely to assume they are also intelligent, kind, honest, and trustworthy. The attractiveness bleeds into every other category, even when there is no evidence to support it. Scott Peterson was attractive. He was well dressed. He was polite. He shook hands firmly. He made eye contact. He asked about your children by name. He helped with the dishes. He opened doors. He brought wine to dinner parties. He was, in every visible dimension, the kind of man you would want your daughter to marry. And that halo was blinding. People saw the polished exterior, and they filled in the rest with their own assumptions. They assumed the politeness meant integrity. They assumed the eye contact meant honesty. They assumed the attractiveness meant goodness. They were not making these assumptions consciously. The halo effect operates below the level of awareness. It is a cognitive shortcut that the brain takes to save time and energy, and most of the time it works well enough. Most polite, attractive, well-dressed people are in fact decent human beings. But when the shortcut encounters someone like Scott Peterson, it fails catastrophically. Because Scott Peterson understood the shortcut. Whether consciously or instinctively, he understood that if you get the surface right, most people will never look deeper. If you shake the right hands and say the right things and show up to the right events, you can do almost anything in the spaces between. Laci did not see it. Sharon Rocha did not see it. The neighbors on Covenant Avenue did not see it. The co-workers at TradeCorp did not see it. Amber Frey did not see it. And in a broader sense, the entire community of Modesto did not see it. They all looked at the same man and saw the same polished surface, and none of them ever thought to knock on it and listen for the hollow sound underneath. And this is not an indictment of those people. This is an indictment of the strategy. Because what Scott Peterson exploited was not stupidity or carelessness. He exploited trust. Human trust. The basic foundational trust that allows a society to function. The trust that says, when someone shows you who they are, you can believe them. When someone tells you they love their wife, you do not need to verify it. When someone says they went fishing, you do not need to demand proof. Scott Peterson weaponized that trust. He used it as cover. He stood behind it like a wall and conducted his real life in the shadow it cast. And by the time anyone thought to look behind the wall, it was too late. I think about the specific moments where the truth was available and no one took it. In November, when Scott started the affair with Amber, his phone records changed. He was making calls at odd hours. He was traveling to Fresno regularly. His schedule shifted. Laci may have noticed. She may not have. But the data was there. The change in pattern was detectable if someone had been looking for it. On December 9th, when he bought the boat and told Amber he lost his wife. Two actions, the same day, both pointed in the same direction. But no one connected them because no one knew about both. On December 14th, when he was at the Christmas formal in Fresno in a tuxedo with another woman, while his pregnant wife was home preparing for the holidays. Someone at that event must have seen them together. Someone must have noticed, but no one knew who he really was. On Christmas Eve morning, when he hitched a boat to his truck and drove 90 miles to fish in the bay, a neighbor saw the truck with the boat. The neighbor later told police, but at the time, it did not register as strange. Why would it? A man going fishing on a day off. That is normal. That is unremarkable. That is the kind of thing that only becomes suspicious in retrospect, after you know what the fishing trip really was. Every single one of those moments was a crack in the facade, and every single one of them went unnoticed. Not because people were not paying attention, but because the facade was so well maintained that the cracks looked like normal imperfections, like the hairline fractures in a plaster wall that you walk past every day without ever thinking the wall might collapse. I have studied many cases in my work. I have looked at hundreds of relationships that ended in tragedy. And the pattern I see most often is not the obvious villain. It is not the man with the temper and the criminal record and the history of violence. Those men are dangerous, absolutely, but they are also visible. People see them coming. People raise alarms. The pattern I see most often is the other kind, the kind that Scott Peterson represents. The charming, polished, well-liked, seemingly devoted partner who operates behind a mask, so convincing that even the people closest to them cannot see through it. The partner who looks right, sounds right, acts right, and is wrong in the most fundamental way a person can be wrong. These are the ones who slip through the net. These are the ones who exploit trust rather than fear. These are the ones who are never suspected until it is far too late, because their entire existence is engineered to prevent suspicion. And I want to say something directly. This is not about making people paranoid. This is not about saying that every charming person is hiding a dark truth. Most charming people are simply charming. Most devoted partners are simply devoted. But the cases I study, the stories I tell, they are about the exceptions, the statistical outliers who use normalcy as a weapon. And the lesson of Scott Peterson is this: when someone shows you a perfect surface, look closer. Not because you expect to find something wrong, but because perfection itself is the tell. Real relationships have rough edges. Real people have off days. Real devotion has arguments and silences and moments of friction. When the surface is too smooth, too polished, too consistent, that is not a sign of a perfect relationship. That is a sign of a performance. Laci Peterson deserved more than a performance. She deserved a real partner. She deserved someone who matched the love she gave with love that was actual and present and true. Instead, she got a man who stood next to her and smiled for the camera while his mind was in Fresno, in the warehouse, in the bay. She deserved to meet her son. She deserved to hold Connor, to feel his weight in her arms, to count his fingers, to hear his first sound. She deserved every single ordinary moment that motherhood would have given her, and every single one of those moments was taken, not by a stranger, not by a random act, by the man who slept next to her every night, the man who put his hand on her belly and felt the baby move, the man who sat in the birthing class and smiled in the right places. That is the anatomy of this tragedy. That is how it became possible. One man's double life, maintained with discipline and precision and an almost inhuman capacity for deception, collided with one woman's trust, and the trust lost. There is one more thing I want to address before I close this chapter, and it is about the people who stood beside Laci before and after. Sharon Rocha. This woman lost her daughter and her grandson to the man she considered a son. She sat in a courtroom for 6 months and listened to the details of her daughter's disappearance, narrated by strangers in suits. She heard the phone recordings. She heard Scott talking to Amber on Christmas Day, while Sharon herself was weeping in the next room. She heard the testimony about the cement anchors and the tidal patterns and the decomposition. And she survived it. She did not just survive it, she carried it forward. She turned her grief into advocacy. She became a voice for families of victims. She wrote a book called For Laci to make sure her daughter was remembered as a person, not as a case number. Sharon Rocha once said something that I think about often. She said, "I used to trust everyone. Now I trust no one." And then she paused, and she corrected herself. She said, "No, that is not true. I trust people, but I watch them now. I watch what they do, not just what they say. That is the lesson. Watch what people do, not just what they say." Because Scott Peterson said all the right things, every single one, and none of them were true. Ron Gransky, Laci's stepfather, carried the weight quietly. He was not in front of the cameras as often as Sharon. He stood in the background at the vigils and the press conferences, but his grief was just as deep. He had helped build the nursery. He had assembled the crib with his own hands. And after the conviction, he went home and dismantled it, piece by piece. He took it apart and put it in a box, and put the box in the garage, and he never opened it again. Brent Rocha, Laci's brother, stood at the microphone after the verdict and said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, "Scott, you know what you did. You know. And you will have to live with that for the rest of your life." He did not scream, he did not rage. He just stated the truth, quietly, and walked away. And Amber Frey, the woman who was pulled into this story without her consent, who was deceived just as thoroughly as Laci, though with different consequences. Amber Frey cooperated with the police. She wore a wire. She let detectives record her most intimate conversations. She took the stand and testified for 5 days in front of the entire nation. She was called every name imaginable by people who did not understand that she was a victim too. Not the same kind of victim as Laci, but a victim of the same lie, the same performance, the same hollow perfection. Amber Frey later wrote a book about her experience. She tried to rebuild her life. She moved away from Fresno. She changed careers. She tried to give her daughter a normal childhood in the shadow of one of the most publicized criminal cases in American history. She did not ask to be part of this story, but she became the key that unlocked it. Without Amber Frey's courage in going to the police, without her willingness to continue the recorded phone calls, without her testimony at trial, the case against Scott Peterson would have been significantly weaker. The circumstantial evidence was strong, but Amber Frey's recordings gave it a human face. They showed the jury who Scott Peterson really was. Not the man on the vigil stage, the man on the phone at midnight whispering to his girlfriend while his wife's body was in the bay. I want to return to the beginning, to the phone call on December 9th, because I started this story with that call, and I want to end with it. I lost my wife. This will be my first Christmas alone. 15 words, that is all. 15 words that were either a confession or a prophecy, or both. 15 words that mapped the future with sickening precision. He did not lose his wife. Losing implies accident. Losing implies that something slipped through your fingers despite your best efforts. You lose your keys. You lose your way. You lose track of time. Scott Peterson did not lose Laci. He removed her. He made a deliberate, calculated decision to end the life of his pregnant wife so that he could continue living the second life he had built with another woman. He weighed the nursery against the freedom. He weighed Connor against the inconvenience. And he chose himself. And then he went fishing. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. He went fishing. The utter mundanity of the alibi. The casual, unremarkable normalcy of it. I went fishing, as if it were a Saturday afternoon, as if nothing had happened, as if the morning had been routine and the drive had been pleasant and the water had been calm. He went fishing in the bay where he left his wife and unborn son. And then he drove 90 miles home and called his mother-in-law and asked, "Is Laci there? Is Laci there?" The three most obscene words in this entire story. Because he already knew the answer. He already knew exactly where Laci was. She was in the water. In the cold, dark water of the San Francisco Bay, weighed down by homemade cement anchors, carrying the body of a boy named Connor who would never see sunlight. And Scott Peterson stood in the kitchen of the house on Covenant Avenue, held the phone to his ear, and performed confusion. Is Laci there? No, Scott. She is not there. She will never be there again. And you know why. This is Miles Ghost Hunter, and this has been the story of Scott and Laci Peterson. The story of a double life that consumed everything it touched. The story of a man who told his mistress he had lost his wife and then made it true. The story of a woman who deserved better than a performance. And the story of a boy named Connor, who had a nursery and a name and a mother who loved him and never got the chance to hold him. Remember what Sharon Rocha said, "Watch what people do, not just what they say, because some men do not just cheat, they erase." Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you what is coming next. Because the story of Scott Peterson is about the mask, the perfect husband who was anything but perfect, the facade that fooled everyone. But Scott Peterson led a double life. Our next couple, they did not need a double life. They were the life. They were the couple that everyone pointed to and said, "That is what love looks like." The neighbors called them relationship goals. Their social media was a catalog of perfect moments, perfect vacations, perfect dinners, perfect smiles, until the night that changed everything. Episode 3, The Perfect Couple Tragedy. And I promise you, what you think you know about perfect relationships is about to change forever. I will see you there. This is Miles Ghost Hunter. Stay sharp, stay aware, and never stop watching.